From the News Channel 5 Network, this is MorningLine.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on MorningLine. Nick Barris here. It is, let's see, today, what day is today?
Wednesday.
It is Wednesday. Gosh, I lose track of time sometimes because my days blur together because there's so much going on. And today's show is a good one. We're going to have a conversation about medical malpractice and the like, and we're going to take an opportunity to promote a special report that's going to be airing tomorrow night. And I think you've seen the promos running, and it is a very, very interesting case that I think anyone who's given birth or had a child and you know, had an infant in a hospital will be concerned with watching, and even not, and I haven't done that myself, obviously. This really shocked me as well. We're going to get into that, and we're going to take your phone calls this morning if you'd like to ask questions about situations at a hospital or a doctor's office for perhaps you feel you've been wronged, you may have a case. But if that's the case, you better get moving fast. We'll get into all of that with our guest this morning. He's the one that can fill us in. He's a regular on the show. Clint Kelly.
Good morning, Nick.
Good
It's
morning,
a beautiful
sir.
morning at that.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. You know, it's nice to have you on as always. And had you survived the storms, I guess?
I did. They weren't as bad as we thought they were going to be.
No. I was covering in the newsroom this morning, though. I mean, there were some water rescues in some of these areas. Don't. Sitting water on the road next to a creek, don't drive through it. Just don't do it.
That's right.
This much water can wash your car
Go
off.
around, don't drown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that. I like that. Well, Clint, thanks for coming on. And the number's on the screen, 737-7587. As always, before we get into some of the details and the lines are open, you can start calling. But explain again what malpractice is. I always like to hit it on the top for our new viewers.
Very simply, it's when there's been a medical mistake or a mistake by a healthcare professional that is, in essence, a violation of the care that they are supposed to provide. That mistake causes a severe or catastrophic injury which would not otherwise have occurred.
And proving it is saying that what happened here, because you'll sometimes have negative results in hospitals, and doctors aren't magicians. There's things they can't cure, but it has to be where you can prove that they did not provide the accepted standard of care?
That's exactly what it is.
Okay.
A basic level of care that all doctors and other healthcare providers agree should be provided under a certain set of circumstances.
Okay, and we'll give you some examples of that this morning, but we should also say, is that not something any attorney can handle? Or talk about how obviously you have a specialty?
I have a specialty. I'm certified in medical malpractice law. There are very few of us here in the Middle Tennessee area that do this. So to answer your question, no, not every attorney
You don't
can do
handle
it.
any other cases?
Very few.
This is, I mean, you don't do divorces, you don't do estate planning.
This is my specialty.
Your specialty is malpractice.
That's correct.
I'm just curious too, this maybe, I don't know if I've asked you this before, why are there not more? Is it because these cases are so complex? Is it because there aren't a lot of them? Why aren't there more malpractice attorneys? I'm just curious.
Because they are complex, they're very expensive to pursue.
Okay.
So those of us that do this regularly have to have a certain amount of financial capability to bring these cases. And finally, there's just very few lawyers these days that try enough jury trials to qualify to be a specialist. These are probably the most hotly litigated cases in Tennessee, in fact, nationwide, you could say, because doctors in particular, being professionals, it's very difficult for them to want to agree to settle one of these cases. And so they have insurance, the insurance companies are aggressive, and they're just more likely to fight these cases than in other types of lawsuits.
Now, you don't end up having to litigate everything in a courtroom, correct? I mean, would you say there's a percentage of the cases you handle that maybe are settled as compared to going to court?
Yeah, Nick, I'm going to say probably about half to maybe 60%, somewhere in that neighborhood. It really depends on the amount of the damages, and it also depends on whether a physician is the defendant as opposed to a hospital. I have more success settling cases and getting paid for my clients from hospitals. There are a lot of different factors that we can talk about later in the show.
Okay, and we should say too, you're sitting there thinking, well, I think I may have been wronged, but I'm not someone who can afford an attorney. Like a lot of these types of cases when you're suing something bigger, he only gets paid if you get paid, right? You take it on contingency.
Absolutely.
Which is why you have to be selective on the cases too. You're taking cases that obviously you think are strong.
That's correct. The only way I take the case is the client does not pay me anything unless I recover money for the client.
Right, and what that means is you could walk into his office and actually have been wronged in some way by the hospital. But if you don't have damages or enough damages, you've had to turn some people away and say, I'm sorry, they did make a mistake here, but this is not something that financially is feasible to sue over.
That's right. There are a large number of cases that I can't take because the damages aren't great enough to warrant the lawsuit, because juries in Tennessee are very, very conservative, and in their mind, unless you have severe catastrophic injuries, almost invariably they'll turn the case down at trial because they think, look, you recovered, you went through some difficult anguish, but a lot of people go through that. Whereas if you have a patient who's lost a limb or lost eyesight, or if there's been a death, juries are much more serious in evaluating those cases. It levels the playing field because they know that leaves consequences for family members.
Okay, well, and as you sit there maybe racking your brain thinking about a situation for yourself or a loved one or a friend that maybe went through it, the one other thing to consider, and one reason you may want to call this morning if you have a situation that's come up, is there is a timetable. Oh. And this I can tell with Clint. He and I are friends, and he's been on this show for a long time. I think of all the things that frustrates you in this business, and you help people get over really difficult situations, is when you know someone's really been wronged and hurt, and they come in after the statute of limitations has expired. And you would have had a great case, and you're like, all right, let's go to work. When did this happen? And it was more than a year. Just hit them with that.
Well, it is extraordinarily painful when those situations come up. And we have a 1-year statute of limitations in Tennessee, meaning you must file what's called a pre-suit notice within 1 year of the date that you discover your injury or the date of the injury, whichever's later. If there's one purpose of this show, Nick, I hope we've accomplished over the last 2 years, is spreading the word to more and more people that you only have a year, and you should call. It costs you nothing to pick up the phone and call a lawyer, such as myself, and get a free consultation rather than waiting a year or a year and a half after you haven't gotten any better, thinking, well, I'll just go ahead and call later, and then find out that you've slept on your rights.
Yeah. If you have a nagging suspicion, there's nothing harmed. And we'll put Clint's number up at the end of the program. You can have that. But certainly, you're welcome to call now. We've had people call into this show that you confirmed, and then you met with them later, did indeed have an actionable case.
There's been a lot of people who've called into this show, Nick, who had potential cases but simply waited too long.
That's the other side. You're right.
And they didn't know any better.
No, yeah, most people don't until you're in that situation. All right, before we get to the phone calls, we'll have to take our first break here. And again, the lines are open. I'm suspecting some people, you said your mom saw it last night. The promos have started running for a special report. On occasion, Clint or other attorneys will mention it. And I'll tell you this, the truth is, the best sources of stories oftentimes for journalists are attorneys, and that is the truth. And there's a very interesting case. Your mom saw the promo. It's running now, and we have a special report airing tomorrow night. But this case, it came through the door, and without giving too much away, when you first heard what happened to this family, what went through your mind?
Didn't believe it. Simply didn't believe it. I've been doing this for over 20 years, Nick, and I've never encountered this particular situation. It's just it gets you to the bone at how bad it is. And you have to watch the show to see, watch the news clip to see what it is. But it's one of those situations that I hope no one ever has to encounter.
Yeah, and some cases are more slam dunk, if you will, than others. I think this is one that would fit the category perhaps of slam dunk in terms of I don't think there's much defense for the hospital in this case.
Well, as I said in the news clip, there is no excuse for this under any circumstances.
And when you see it, what we're talking about involves an infant, a newborn, and the family, and of course the joy of the moment of birth and celebrating a healthy child. And then what happened next is you put yourself in that position and you're like, wow, if that had happened to my infant moments after the child was born, that was born healthy, wow.
And it could have been worse, Nick, and I hope part of your news story will get the word out to people, particularly in the healthcare industry, and even to newborn parents of newborns. You have to be careful, and in some cases you can't control it, but you have to follow safety procedures, or else terrible things can happen in a hospital.
Yeah, I'm wondering, in how many of these cases that you've handled, as you know, before we take the break and get to the calls, I want to touch on some of this. Is it a case of just gross negligence? Is it just human error that just sometimes happens, just an honest mistake? I don't know if you ever have come across any cases where they're actually flat out malicious. What do you?
No, I don't believe this is malicious at all. I believe this is a horrible mistake. It is human error, but it's failure to follow safety procedures. That's why we have them. What if you got in an airplane and the pilot just decided, I'm not going to go through the checklist. I'll just take off. Yeah. I mean, there are reasons why we follow safety procedures, so things like what you're going to see tomorrow night don't happen.
Yeah, and it rocks you. It was interesting, too. You know, we had talked about a case where there was an individual that, was he going in for colonoscopy or something, and he was knocked out, but his tape recorder was playing? I don't mind saying that I had my colonoscopy. I was due for it a couple weeks ago. And I thought about it because when you have a colonoscopy, it's a routine exam to check for colon cancer or whatever. It's not the most comfortable thing, but they knock you out.
Right.
And I thought of leaving my tape recorder play, and I didn't. But that case, it hit me thinking, in that case, just to refresh people, it was he had his phone recorder playing by accident, and he got back in the car and heard what the doctors were saying while they were performing a procedure on him while he was out.
They were joking about his anatomy. They were talking about, first of all, the doctor was making fun of him because they thought that he was sort of a wimp, that she had to take time to explain everything to him in terms of the risks. And then the most outrageous part of it is she identified something on his penis which no one else saw and said that he had a sexually transmitted disease, which he did not, and it got into the record.
So that's where the real damage happened.
That's malicious.
Yes.
Nick. That's about as ugly as it gets. And he didn't know any of this until he played the recording on his cell phone, really by happenstance, and realized all this had happened and went and got his medical records, and sure enough, there was an STD in his medical chart.
Now, was that the big offense in that case? Because he ended up winning a lawsuit there, I believe. But was it that STD ended up on there, or is it just bad? If they're making cracks about you when you're out, that's not nice. But is that actionable?
Yeah, it is. It's defamation, and it's libel or slander when it's in writing. Anytime somebody makes a representation of fact that's demonstrably false, particularly about your health condition, and it gets into the record, that is a defamation. It is a lie. The discussions that took place during the colonoscopy, all that did was make it more aggravating. In other words, there was intent to defame. But the doctor thought she could just get away with it because he was unconscious and no one ever know about it. Now, the doctor didn't know that this was going to be reported in the chart. The nurse took her word for it. Which, what do you expect a nurse to do?
Yeah, it's the doctor. I'm going to listen.
But I'll tell you, Nick, once something gets into a medical chart, it doesn't go away.
Yeah,
you can make amendments, but it's always going to be there. Doesn't erase it. There's a Seinfeld show on that. It's kind of funny where Elaine's trying to go from doctor to doctor, and her chart gets passed from one to the other, and they keep seeing that she's a difficult patient. She can't get it erased.
It stays, and so that's why you have to address it. And even when you do, it's there.
Exactly.
It's okay. It's like a bad credit record. All right, we're going to take a break.
Or a bad tattoo.
Or a bad tattoo never goes away. All right, the number 737-7587. If you're on hold, stay where you are. We'll open up the phone lines. Take your phone calls. Think if you have a question about a procedure or something where you're wondering, gosh, do you think maybe I have a case, or just something in general about malpractice? We'll take your calls with Clint Kelly right after this. Stay with us.
If you want